Breaking news here on Ana Cabrera Reports. Markets dropping sharply again this morning as China unleashes retaliation against President Trump's tariffs. Plus, a brand new jobs report, and it's stronger than expected despite DOGE. The top takeaways, even as we see sweeping economic turmoil. And a handful of national security officials fired in the last 24 hours. A conspiracy theorist with influence inside the Oval Office appearing to claim credit. It's 10 Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York, and we are covering lots of breaking news. Let's start with the markets dropping again this morning, right on the heels of that worst day that they closed last night since the global pandemic. Today's fall coming as China announces 34% retaliatory tariffs on all U.S. goods, and the global tariffs pushing recession fears to a whole new level today, with J.P. Morgan darkening its forecast for the American economy, raising the odds of a recession to 60%, up from 40%, citing disruptive U.S. policies as the biggest factor. Let's bring in NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander and NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. So, Peter, retaliation from China, from Canada, recession alarm bells are going off. Is any of this changing the president's posture?
Well, it doesn't look like it so far. We heard from the president yesterday as he was heading down to Florida, saying in effect that we did surgery on a sick patient. They're now out of that operation. The question that remains unanswered there is how long is the recovery in the president's eyes for this patient, the patient being the U.S. economy and the country as a whole right now. The president, though, seems very much to be leaning in on this. No indication that he is backing down. Notably, just yesterday, we heard from one of his top trade advisors saying, let's make this very clear. This is not a negotiation. The president, an hour later, saying the tariffs give us great power to negotiate. So that uncertainty, and I think uncertainty is the key word here, is really hovering over this entire effort. The president, within the last couple of hours on social media, while he spends time at his Florida golf resort, posting to the many investors coming into the United States, investing massive amounts of money. My policies will never change. This is a great time to get rich, richer than ever before. And as it relates to China, with the announcement that a day after the U.S.'s additional 34% tariff, so 54% in all, will go into effect. China said they're going to put 34% back on the U.S. that day. The president writes, China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they cannot afford to do. So the trade war only appears to be spiraling and escalating. And at least for the moment, there is no indication from anybody here, at least certainly not publicly, about any indication to back away.
And Peter, yesterday, President Trump suggested that these tariffs were a negotiating tactic. Now he's saying nothing's going to change it. But what kind of negotiation is possible here? Why not start with those negotiations instead of tanking the global markets first?
Well, the president has made very clear he views tariffs broadly as a negotiating tool. Remember when he announced the tariffs initially on Canada and Mexico, and then right before they went into effect, he said, look, we got something for nothing. Just by threatening them, we were able to get them to crack down on their borders to prevent the, fentanyl from coming into the United States, making no note of the fact that a very, very small bit of fentanyl comes in from China. Not that any of it is okay. Comes in from Canada. Not that any of it is okay, but this proportionally was comparatively at least insignificant. But the president does view this, as he has made clear again, as a leverage tool. The president said, we heard from every country in the world yesterday. There's no indication of that just yet. We're reaching out to foreign allies around the world, but they have real concerns about what's happening here, the impact it'll have on them. Many of those leaders around the country that have long time been American allies, effectively saying U.S.'s leadership in the world, its role in the world has changed, and that they're going to have to make plans to sort of go it alone, so to speak.
All right, Peter Alexander, thank you for bringing us the latest from the White House. Brian, as we've been noting, the markets are down again today. I'm just looking, and the Dow is currently down about 1,000 points. I mean, we're nearing correction territory if it closes at this level later today. I mean, if you could just detail first the details of these retaliatory tariffs that we're hearing from China, because that is obviously part of the impact on the markets right now. And what does it signal in terms of the, snowball effect?
Yeah, and I think that is the big kind of catalyst for the second back-to-back day of slides in the stock market. Again, an ugly day. Let's just say it on Wall Street again, 2.9% down on the S&P 500, largely seen as a more broad-based measure of what the overall stock market looks like. And it's just across every sector, Anna, including including even tech companies that don't even export physical goods. So this tells you that investors are certainly spooked. But look, when you have the two largest economies in the world going to war with each other, at least economically, that is the reason for why, if you're an investor, you're saying, you know what, this is going to take a huge bite out of companies that see China as a major export market, not just U.S. automakers, but any other company that has prioritized, understandably, the second largest economy in the world. So when you think about the types of things that China just slapped a 34% reciprocal tariff on, I mean, I think we are phrasing a lot of this tariff discussion around the United States, perhaps not exporting as much to China as we import from them. But it is indeed the case that they're a major market for U.S. automotive products. I mean, Buicks, for example, are an enormously popular GM product that are loved by Chinese consumers. So if you slap a 34% tariff on those types of products, and it makes it 34% potentially more expensive for Chinese people to buy those American products, well, that's going to set up a barrier between these two largest countries, which is a reason why you have JP Morgan projecting the odds of, those are global recession numbers, the probability going up from 40% to 60%. I mean, that is underscored by that intertwinedness between these two economies actually slightly coming undone today.
Okay, so Wall Street also one thing, but then there's Main Street. So what types of impacts should Americans expect to see soon?
Well, I mean, higher prices, right? Because the idea is that if the United States is going to tariff at rates for 54% for things coming in from China, and yet some of the major exports that we take in from China here in the United States, things like phones, computers, toys, car parts, that's a big one, video games as well. You can see that list of all these other categories that could get impacted.
Shoes,
clothing, shoes, well, clothing,
wines and spirits too, coming from Italy and from France.
Yeah,
so those European taxes are going to hurt.
And we haven't even heard of the retaliatory tariffs from the European Union, but this could all threaten to make things here in the United States more expensive. I mean, you look at clothes, for example. I think people don't recognize that over 90% of the clothes that we sell here in the United States are made abroad, which means that, you know, we have some projections like from the Yale Budget Lab that clothing prices could go up by 17%. It's going to depend on what you're buying here. Now, the immediacy of that is a little bit unclear. We don't know when, you know, some of these price hikes that are being projected on your screen ahead of you. Again, things like food products, rice could go up by 10%, produce could go up by 4%. It's not necessarily going to happen immediately when these reciprocal tariffs take effect, but it won't be long. For car prices, for example, where the projections are imports could get as expensive as $15,000 more depending on what vehicle. It's not going to happen next week, but auto dealers and those inside the industry have been telling me it's really a matter of potentially 1 month away.
And just looking at that last graphic, I mean, the $3,800 per year on average that the American household could see their costs go up. That is significant, especially when you're thinking about, you know, how much do you make? What kind of a percentage of your income is that? And for those people who make less money, that's going to really, really hurt them. Brian, talk to us about today's jobs report as well.
Yeah, well, it's a very busy day for me, but the jobs report did come out at 8:30 right before the market opened. It doesn't seem like it offered any reprieve, even though the jobs report on it was actually pretty solid. So we got over 240,000 jobs, more than 220,000 jobs added in the month of March. That was well above the estimates on Wall Street. They were expecting something closer to 140,000. So they really kind of blew the doors off of the expectations there. The unemployment rate was 4.2%, which was kind of steady with the last few reports that we had seen. When it comes to the broad-based, job gains that we saw, it was kind of across a number of sectors. So the economy does not look like it's in a recession right now. I mean, unemployment is still strong. Inflation is still relatively okay. We saw relative improvements in some measures that we saw last month. But the question is, what happens 6 months from now, 12 months from now as a result of these tariffs?
You have your hands full, and you're doing a great job. Thank you so much, Brian, for staying across all of that for us. And joining us now is the former Deputy Director on the National Economic Council under President Biden, Bharat Ramamurthy. Bharat, good to have you with us. In the midst of this economic turmoil unleashed by the president, the White House is saying, quote, trust in Trump. Should we?
I don't see why you would, or what would historically tell you that you should. I think what the president is trying to do is give investors certainty that these tariffs are going to remain in place for a long time, because you need that certainty in order to make a multi-year investment in new production in the United States. But if I were an investor, and I've talked to some, none of them have that kind of certainty, because this is the same guy who announced that we were going to do tariffs on Canada and turned around 24 hours later and sent out a good phone call with the prime minister and decided to change the tariffs. Without that kind of multi-year certainty, you're not going to see a surge in U.S. investment, and that's why I'm very skeptical that that's going to occur.
And now we have China retaliating. Canada has taken a pretty clear stance that they'll go tit for tat with Trump on this. The EU is poised to retaliate as well. Could these major players just decide to rely less on U.S. trade going forward? Is that a realistic outcome here? And what kind of impact could that have on Americans?
No, absolutely. The thing is, as Brian mentioned, we export a lot of autos to China. Another thing that we export a lot of is soybeans, and that's a big domestic agricultural industry in the United States. All of a sudden, American soybeans are going to be 30% higher in China. And imagine if you're a buyer of soybeans in China, that's a prohibitively high increase in prices. You're going to look to other markets, to other countries to provide that product for you. And you can't just snap your fingers and get that back. This could be a permanent reduction in the export markets for American producers. And that's why this kind of unmitigated trade war with one of the largest trading countries in the world, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And at the end of the day, it's going to hurt both consumers and exporters in the United States.
One of the central messages that's coming from this White House has been that America's working class has been getting the short end of the stick for decades. And this is designed to fix that. Is this the best solution to that problem? And if not, what is?
Well, I would say, look, if you don't get the surge in investment, and for the reasons I explained, I don't think we will, all you're getting if you're a low-income, middle-income consumer is higher prices for coffee, higher prices for bananas. I saw a report this morning that the iPhone price could go from $1,000 an iPhone to $3,500 an iPhone. I mean, these are prohibitively high cost increases for typical families, and there's no argument for why you're going to get better wages or better jobs alongside of that. Look, I think the approach that we took in the Biden administration, which was targeted investments in American manufacturing paired with targeted tariffs on certain items, on steel, on aluminum, in industries where we want to see more production domestically, that was largely the right approach. And look, as Brian said, we got a good jobs report this morning. There's a lot of indications that the economy that Trump inherited was moving in the right direction, declining inflation, strong growth, strong wage numbers. And all he's done for the last 2 months is come in and mess it all up.
Although the jobs report, again, suggests otherwise, and I'm sure the Trump administration is going to be cheering this jobs report for today, at least. I want you to listen to top Trump aide Stephen Miller last night, who's out there defending these tariffs.
Trillions of dollars that would be in the pockets of American workers is now in China, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Canada, Mexico, all across Africa, all across Asia. This isn't just about moving around some lines on a ledger. This is about remedying the systemic injustice that says the streets of America are filled with European cars and Japanese cars, but the streets of Europe and Japan have no American cars.
Bharat, so should Americans want parity?
Well, first of all, none of that is true in the sense that if you go to Europe, you'll see lots of American cars there. We have global trading relationships with a lot of these countries. And yes, it's the case that we saw a reduction in manufacturing jobs starting in the 1990s as we saw more globalization. President Biden, who I worked for, talked a lot about that. The question is, what do we do to recover some of the advanced manufacturing jobs that are good paying jobs, and at the same time acknowledge that every American who's a worker is also a consumer and also benefits from the fact that we get cheaper goods at the end of the day. And that is important for making family budgets work. I think you need to do this in a targeted, strategic, long-term way. And none of those words describe what Trump is doing here.
Bharat Ramamurthy, thank you for your insights. Appreciate your perspective on this. We're going to dig deeper into the worldwide rebuke of President Trump's tariffs, already wreaking havoc on the markets. As you take a look, all of the major indexes are down right now, at least 3%. One of the first industries feeling the effects here at home is the auto industry. Plant closures and temporary layoffs already underway. And now Canada has slapped its own set of tariffs on American cars. Volkswagen says it will put an import fee on cars made in the U.S. Lots to discuss in this realm. And joining us now is a mayor of a city with 2 GM plants, Democratic Mayor of Lansing, Michigan, Andy Shore. Mayor, thanks so much for being here. Earlier in the show, we walked through some of the real-world impacts this could cost families almost $4,000 a year. I know the average income in Lansing is around $48,000 a year, you say. So what will this mean for people there?
Higher costs, the threat of job loss. We have, as you said, we have 2 assembly plants. The auto industry is huge in Lansing. We're a GM town. And if car prices go up, then there'll be less cars that are bought, which means there'll be less cars that are made, which means there'll be less shifts that are needed, the threat of plant closures, so job loss. So this is something that we watch very closely whenever something deals with the auto industry or advanced manufacturing, the parts that are made, and this is going to increase all of those costs.
And I know you're worried about the auto industry as well as you've mentioned construction in your city. Are you already seeing some effects, or is it still the brace for impact mode?
Brace for impact. The uncertainty is crazy right now. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. We hear yesterday that Stellantis laid off 900 employees, which affects Warren and Sterling Heights in Michigan. Again, we're a GM town, so we're waiting to hear. But brace for impact. If we make these cars here, and we're proud of that. We've had cars come here, and the Cabrera was brought back to Lansing from Canada a few years ago. But a lot of the parts go back and forth over the borders, and now if there are tariffs that are going to increase the costs of those parts, then the cost of cars are going to increase. We have the longest undefended border with Canada, and now we're going to be tariffing both ways in some cases. So it's going to increase costs, which is going to reduce purchases and impact our jobs and our community significantly.
The White House keeps saying, this is short-term pain for longer-term gain. But of course, workers who are already being laid off by automakers don't know if those jobs will come back, or the people who've worked 50 years, they're seeing their retirement accounts evaporate. That's long-term pain. What's your response to those assurances that this is just a phase? And wait for it, the tax cuts, which still have to pass Congress, will be a cure-all.
It's now pain, right? This is coming now. By theory, any of the things that we do in Canada will now onshore, it will take years and billions of dollars to build those things here. So what are we going to do in the meantime? The tax cuts are not going to make up for job losses, for shift losses. They're not going to be paying the employees the high-paying jobs that they're going to be losing if we lose a shift or if we close plants. Or they're not going to be paying every citizen who wants to buy a car $10,000 more just to buy that car. Same with the groceries. If I can't get avocados because Essex County outside of Windsor is where most of those come from, the White House's any potential tax cuts for middle, lower income citizens are not going to produce more groceries or take over for the increase in grocery costs. Same with steel. We can't, if we can't get steel and we can't get wood, then we can't build the performing arts center that we want to build here. We can't build, or the prices are increased for a new city hall, for the new hotel, for all of the incredible growth that we have going on in Lansing. All the numbers all of a sudden don't work. So now we're trying to get all of that taken care of before the prices go up. I don't think the tax cuts are going to take care of any of that.
Mayor Andy Shore, really appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next here on Ana Cabrera reports, she has trumpeted 9/11 conspiracies, has been criticized for racist posts. The impact Laura Loomer might now be having on U.S. national security. Plus tariff confusion. You've sent in questions and we'll have answers live from the New York Stock Exchange. Stay right there. Who recently met with President Trump in the Oval Office. Now, Loomer has zero national security experience, has espoused conspiracy theories claiming counsel, and again, appearing to claim credit. Overnight, a defense official
backed by our guarantee at customink.com.
A wave of national security ousters is sweeping the White House and raising alarm as a conspiracy theorist appears to claim credit. Overnight, a defense official and 3 other sources tell NBC the director of the National Security Agency and his deputy were fired. This just following the forced exit of 3 others from the National Security Council. And again, appearing to take credit for those firings is right-wing activist Laura Loomer, who recently met with President Trump in the Oval Office. Now, Loomer has 0 national security experience, has espoused conspiracy theories claiming 9/11 was an inside job. She's made false claims about mass shootings and faced criticism for anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant posts online. Here was the president yesterday when asked about Loomer.
What did she recommend?
She recommended certain people for jobs.
Adding to the administration, not
Adding.
Who did she
not
recommend?
firing?
Well, she'll recommend that too. But yesterday she recommended some people for jobs.
Did she have anything to do with the NSC aides who were ousted?
No.
Let's bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake and former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, former ranking member of the Intelligence Committee and President Emerita of the Wilson Center. Garrett, what is the White House saying about these national security ousters, and have they given any credence to Loomer's claim that she made recommendations?
Anna, they're saying nothing at all. What we have so far is what you just heard there from the president, which I think we have to take with an enormous grain of salt, given that Loomer was on social media yesterday calling for the firing of individuals in the national security space. I reached out to the NSC today. They referred me to the Pentagon, who said that it would be the Pentagon's decision whether or not to keep this general at the top of the NSA and his deputy in place. There's a bit of a difference here because the people who were fired yesterday, who worked for the National Security Council in the White House, were folks who were hired by the Trump team. These are folks who were brought in to work just specifically for this president, whereas the firings at the National Security Agency are career people who have been there for decades. That is often used against officials in Donald Trump's Washington. If you worked for Joe Biden or if you worked for anyone who's perceived to have been a Trump enemy, that can sometimes be used against you. But the silence here from the White House is deafening and leading Laura Loomer's version of events to be the one that is sticking. And it's worth noting that this tension between Loomer and other staffers, advisors around the president goes back quite a long time. The president has always viewed Loomer as a valuable asset. His team during the campaign certainly did not. They ultimately briefly banned her from the campaign plane when she was advising the president around that debate with Vice President Harris.
What is it that he likes so much about her?
I think he feels like she will tell it to him straight, or at least tell him what he wants to hear. I mean, the president values loyalty above almost every other personal characteristics. Loomer is certainly loyal to him, and she has her own view of others who are loyal to him. I think the president likes that she sort of pierces the bubble of paid advisors around him. I've heard it told to me by other people in the president's orbit that sometimes if you're not taking his money, if you don't work directly for him, he values your opinion a little bit more because he doesn't necessarily think that you are just repeating what he wants to hear. So in that way, I think she might provide something that he perceives of value to him in terms of advice or how things are being perceived from the outside, from his base, which is so important to him.
Garrett Haake, appreciate your reporting. Thanks. Congresswoman, we mentioned Loomer's history of conspiracy theories, of racist statements. You're steeped in national security and intelligence space. So how concerning is it that someone like this is advising the president of the United States on, of all things, national security?
Well, you just reported that she has no national security experience. There are others on the Trump team who also don't, and so we ended up with something like Signalgate. I think what's going on here is that unwittingly he is coupling a potential economic recession with a national security recession. I'm worried about both, but on the second, where I know a lot more, I'm very worried about a massive cyber attack on U.S. soil, which this Commission on National Security Strategy I chaired was warned about, and we're going to be dark. The head of Cyber Command in the Pentagon is a 34-year, 4-star general appointed in a non-political way to succeed a fabulous guy, Paul Nakasone, as the head of our NSA, which is our signal intelligence branch, plus the Cyber Command. It makes absolutely no sense to remove them. And the White House firings, all I can imagine is that he's lost confidence in Mike Waltz, and that firing all the people closest to Waltz is a way to cause Waltz to resign. and maybe take because he admitted or claimed that Signalgate was his responsibility. But where does that leave the United States?
Right.
Isn't his first responsibility the security of our country, both economically and in terms of our national security? I don't see any of these moves making any sense in either direction.
I mean, I just want to emphasize what you pointed out. These NSA officials who were ousted have deep expertise. Both are career officials. Wendy Noble was there since 1987, has worked her way up through. So these aren't like Biden appointees, even though, one of the reasons we've heard they've been let go is a lack of loyalty to Donald Trump. And you mentioned that General Hawk has 30 plus years of defense experience, intel experience. He led U.S. Cyber Command. I mean, what does that loss mean for the U.S.? How will these people be replaced?
That loss is absolutely huge. And oh, by the way, suggesting that the Inspector General of the Pentagon investigate now what happened with Signalgate is also kind of nonsensical, since all the IGs were removed. This must be a political appointee, and presumably this was done so that Congress wouldn't investigate. Where does that leave us? In a terrible place. Congress, pay attention here. Roger Wicker and Jack Reed, the chairman and ranking member of Senate Armed Services, have been enormously brave. And if they, on a bipartisan basis, step up and look at all this immediately, I think that would be very helpful. I'm not trying to be partisan about this. I'm trying to be reasonable about this. We all take it, or I did, we all members of Congress, and certainly the president, to protect our national security and respect the Constitution. And summary firings with no reasons given are not the history of the United States of America.
Former Congresswoman Jane Harman, I appreciate your perspective and insights. Thanks for being with us. Top of the breaking news on Wall Street, the markets down again and sharply after China announced its retaliation to President Trump's tariffs, escalating this now global trade war. These tariffs are going to impact so many parts of the economy and your personal finances. I know you have questions, and this morning we're going to try to answer some of them the best we can. And for that, let's go to NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, who's joining us live from the New York Stock Exchange in Lower Manhattan. And I know you have a lot that you're monitoring there, Christine. Thanks for squeezing us in to answer these viewer questions. Let's start with a question that was sent in by a viewer that I know is on so many minds right now. What products will be impacted by these tariffs?
I mean, these tariffs are broad, and for some countries, they're very, very big, like China. So think footwear, think clothing, think all kinds of electronics. The list is pretty long. Sporting goods, toys, fruits and vegetables, furniture, wine and spirits, cell phones. The cars in particular, you've got some estimates that for a big SUV, you're talking about $10,000 to $15,000 extra for the price of that.
Next question. How quickly will all these tariffs affect food prices? And we got a lot of questions specifically about coffee. As people who get up early, we can certainly relate to that concern.
So you can see why food prices would be affected most quickly, right? Especially perishable food, things that are coming in on the borders and you can only keep in a warehouse maybe for 8 days or 10 days. Also, we have steel and aluminum tariffs that are already in effect, and that the aluminum is used in the cans that other foods are packaged in. So the packaging is an issue as well. Also, paper packaging, when you've got all of these tariffs against Canadian goods coming into effect, that could, in fact, raise the price of packaging. So the experts I'm talking to are saying it would be coming weeks likely, but if you're talking about perishable items, it might be more quickly. And then longer term, if these tariffs last, the forecasts are something like $3,800 extra a year in the stuff you normally buy, the cost because of these tariffs.
Another viewer asked, what about drug prices? Are tariffs going to impact drug prices, noting most insulin's not produced here?
Yeah, half of the drugs consumed in the U.S. are not produced here. I think 80% of the ingredients to make the drugs are not produced here. So this is a really sticky area for the White House. They did not include pharmaceuticals in this first big round of tariffs, but the president yesterday teased that pharmaceuticals and semiconductors are on the way. The industry has been sort of lobbying and begging that if they do tariffs, they don't just do 25% all at once. It could cause shortages and price spikes for these foreign-made drugs that Americans rely on so much. So we're waiting to see what the White House says about this and what the president's plan is. But the experts and economists and the industry say if there are tariffs on imported drugs, the goal, of course, is to make them in the United States. That could take some time in the short term. That could mean some pain for consumers.
Okay, so look into your crystal ball now for this next question. How long will the short-term pain last? Weeks, months? Are we talking years?
I have no idea, and that's why business leaders and foreign governments and consumers are so worried here right now. They don't know how long this is going to last. They don't know if this is President Trump negotiating with other countries or if these really will be baseline tariffs that stay on. If these tariffs stay on and other countries retaliate, it could be months, it could be years. One forecast from Mark Zandi at Moody's Analytics was if you had these tariffs stay on long term, you could have a year-long recession in the United States. The stock market is down a couple of big days in a row. It's down 10%, more than 10% now since Trump took office, and it's unclear if he is concerned about what happens in the stock market here. He's got much bigger goals, he says.
So that leads us to our final question from our viewers today, which is, what are the goals of this policy? What does a win look like?
Three things. There have been three goals this White House has illustrated. Fentanyl. The president wants to stop fentanyl coming into this country. So he blames Canada and Mexico for that, and China. And that's what is the reasoning behind some of these tariffs. He also wants things made in America, whether it's furniture, whether it's shoes, whether it's wedding dresses, whether it's semiconductors, whether it's Apple phones, your iPhone. He wants it made in America, cars especially. The problem is that if you and he wants to raise a lot of revenue. He wants to raise a lot of money to fund the government so that he can pay for tax cuts down the road here in this big tax debate happening. The rub here is that if you actually then suddenly move everything to America, which would take years and it's kind of unlikely, then you wouldn't have the revenue, right? So some of these goals from the White House work at odds with others. But more often than not, we hear the president say, if you don't want to pay a tariff, make it in the USA.
Christine Romans, it's good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much for bringing us those answers. And we hope you will keep sending us your questions. We'll try to answer more of them in the days ahead. Joining us now, Michael Hardway. He's the former communications director for Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and Rina Shah, former senior GOP congressional advisor. Rina, here are some of the arguments we've been hearing from Republicans who are defending these tariffs. Quote, I think most members on our side are very willing to give the president time. This is a bold but risky action. I, for one, hope the president is correct. I do believe this is a negotiating tool. I don't believe these tariffs will be in effect long term. But by the way, the White House talking points that NBC News obtained says this was not a negotiating tool. How long can Republicans stay on the defense?
I think for a while longer, because look, this day has been a long time coming. And I can tell you that because as a former congressional aide, I had heard this talk for the longest time that we need to bring manufacturing back within our borders. How exactly do you do that? You take a bold gamble like Trump did. Now, I get it. People are very worried with the markets in free fall. But what I'm looking at here is Trump is dismissing this market panic for a reason. He's saying it's about the short-term hurt that's going to lead to the long-term gain. And we've heard it over and over. But what the scale of these levies have done is caught our allies off guard. And so the geopolitical stakes are super high. And that's what's got Republicans on the Hill feeling a little shaky. It's not that this is happening, because like I said, this has been a dream of theirs for a long time. There's been so much talk, but no action. How do we boost American manufacturing? You've got to take a risk like this first.
Michael, we did see rare bipartisan action in the Senate for Republicans voting with Democrats to try and halt the tariffs on Canadian imports. And now we're hearing from Rep. Gregory Meeks, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, that he's exploring using a so-called discharge petition to try to bypass GOP leadership and force a vote on that legislation. Do you think that move will work in the House?
I don't think it'll work in the House, but I do appreciate the effort. I think the sad reality is that in these first few months of the Trump presidency, Republicans in Congress have basically abandoned their authority that Congress has to oversee the executive branch. And I think that as we look forward and we have entered this global trade war that Donald Trump has put us in with skyrocketing prices and with our 401ks falling, it's important that Congress does something. And I think, Mr. Meeks should be applauded for his efforts here. I think there's a bipartisan effort in the Senate as well to try to rein this in, but Congress really has to step forward. And Democrats are doing that, but Republicans have to join them if we're all going to corral this and have some sort of real plan from the perspective of the United States to address these skyrocketing prices that are happening under Donald Trump.
Rena, you talk about how this has been a long time coming, but that's interesting because there's this clip from 1987 that's circulating online of Republican icon President Reagan giving a radio address specifically about tariffs, citing tariffs' role in the Great Depression, offering this warning.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Rena, if that comes to pass, if any of this that he just mentioned starts spiraling out of control, where is the off-ramp for Republicans who are right now defending this move?
Very, very difficult to find an off-ramp when you're talking about the disruption of supply chains that lead to higher costs for American consumers. I think to put it in context for at least my generation of millennials, we're talking about something like a $2,300 iPhone, because of Beijing wanting to retaliate in such a way and focus on rare earth minerals, right? So this is talk that spreads far deeper than just about the economics here. And it's not just about the economics. We're talking about a power play that essentially is looking to reorder the world global trade as we know it. And that, I think, the significant impacts there, right? The IMF warning of the significant risk, but the countermeasures that allies have taken, allies like Canada, the EU, these countermeasures are serious because they want to send the message as well. Right now, short term, we're expecting volatility, higher prices, layoffs, shaken confidence, right? But long term, if Trump's tariffs really stick, what they really could do is outweigh the good. The pain could outweigh the good. Right. And that's what Reagan talked about. So if retaliation deepens, one thing we know right now, uncertainty is the only certainty.
It's all so uncertain, and it creates a lot of stress.
Very stressful.
It creates some consequences that are already playing out in the stock market, for one. Michael, when we look at the reaction, we just learned Governor Newsom of California is asking countries to exempt California from tariffs. Kind of an interesting development on how Democratic governors are trying to respond.
Well, listen, that's what happens when the White House acts unilaterally. I mean, California is the largest state in this country and has a GDP that's larger than some countries around the world. And so the fact that Mr. Newsom would attempt this makes perfect sense. Again, this is a part of a lack of leadership on the White House's part, because if they coordinated with the largest states in the country, then perhaps they might have been on the same page. But this is what happens where you have states that want to carve out so that they don't have skyrocketing prices. I mean, again, look, prices around the world on most things we buy are relatively affordable because of global trade and because of the World Trade Organization and because of America's leadership in helping drive down those prices. Donald Trump is destroying all of those things in a way that doesn't really make sense for anyone. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays itself out, because even if you look at the formula they used to calculate the trade deficits, they were just wrong. And so if their math is wrong on that, what else is their math wrong on?
Michael Hardaway and Rena Shah, I really appreciate the conversation today. Thank you both for joining us. Up next on Ana Cabrera Reports, a critical hearing today. Welcome back. In just a few hours, a Maryland federal judge will hear the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man with protected legal status that the Trump administration admits they mistakenly deported to that notorious prison in El Salvador because of a so-called administrative error. The man's family and attorneys have been speaking this morning with supporters ahead of this hearing. Here was his wife just moments ago.
In a blink of an eye, our 3 children lost their father, and I lost the love of my life. Kilmer, if you can hear me.
Kilmer, si me puedes escuchar.
I miss you so much.
Joining us now is MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. So this hearing's supposed to get underway in just a few hours. What's supposed to happen at this hearing?
No, Anna, today is going to be a lot about trying to determine if there is a remedy for the conceded administrative error that the government made. The plaintiff's lawyers here say that because Mr. Abrego Garcia was sent to El Salvador pursuant to an agreement with the El Salvadoran government to hold migrants in custody, that the U.S. government should essentially be able to unwind that and get him back. We also know from the other case before Judge Boasberg that there were at least 8 women and 1 man who were placed on those flights who were then turned around and returned to the U.S. Well, they remain in custody. They weren't released, but they are not languishing in an El Salvadoran notorious prison like Mr. Abrego Garcia is. Those are some of the issues that the judge in Maryland will want to get to the heart of today.
And could the judge issue a ruling including asking him to be returned?
He could, particularly if he finds that Mr. Abrego Garcia is still in the constructive custody of the United States. He's not formally in U.S. custody, right? As we know, he's in this El Salvadoran prison, but he is in custody because of an agreement with between the government and El Salvador.
And there was also that hearing yesterday involving the use of the Alien Enemies Act and Judge Boasberg's order that you mentioned. What came of that hearing?
We are waiting to hear what Judge Boasberg is going to do in terms of whether we are heading toward contempt hearings. He definitely said there's a fair likelihood that the government acted in bad faith with respect to those deportations on March 14th with those 2 first flights. Mr. Abrego Garcia, by the way, was on the 3rd flight, supposed to be all people who had orders of removal. Mr. Abrego Garcia does have an order of removal, but then he got something called a withholding of an order of removal, preventing the government from transporting him out of the country because he believes he is subject to retaliation in El Salvador. In Venezuela. Because of that, he shouldn't have been on any flight, whether under the Alien Enemies Act or under that 3rd flight for people subject to orders of removal.
No, and I think you were right the first time. He is from El Salvador, but that is where the judge earlier in his case had said he could face his life being threatened. He could face torture if he had been sent back to El Salvador. Now he's there.
Correct.
All right. Well, Lisa, thank you for keeping on top of all these cases. It's a lot. And thank you, though. It matters. We